Hey everyone, welcome to Sunrise Extra on a Friday, TGIF. This has been, I feel like I say this every week. It's been like one of the craziest news weeks ever.
So stop saying it.
Yes. So we wrapped up the Republican National Convention last night with the big speech, over an hour, from President Donald Trump making the case for his re-election. And joining us this morning, KGW political analyst Len Bergstein. Thank you for waking up early with us. We had him live on the show, and we're continuing the conversation here online with you, Len. So what is kind of, now the morning after, hopefully you got some sleep, what's kind of your big takeaway from the night? How did Trump's speech go? How did the other message from the RNC kind of come across last night?
Well, it was a big, tumultuous week. It was kind of like, without using too much of a sports metaphor, what we saw in the basketball finals. We had a bubble around the convention, and then we had outside real world emerging and intervening into it. The Republicans had three big challenges, I thought, going into the week, and some of them they met, and some of them they didn't. They had to humanize Trump. They know that they have a picture of Donald Trump amongst most of Americans as not being a very successful, somewhat chaotic president, and the world being, divisive in America. So they had to humanize him and at the same time demonize his opponent, Joe Biden. So they took the attack that, not that he's Sleepy Joe, but that he's an empty vessel. He's the captive of the radical social left agenda, which they thought placed up as the devil. Secondly, they had to kind of erase the picture we have of reality. Americans know that COVID is with us, and it's a disaster. 185,000 deaths or more. We know that the economy is in deep problems, and we know that the world is not a safe place for us as America. So they had to kind of erase that image and try and replace it with an image of the president in charge, successful, having defeated the COVID virus, and pointing towards a brighter future. And then I think third, they had to scare the stuffings out of parts of the electorate to say, look, here's what the stakes are about. If you elect Joe Biden, what you're going to do is you're going to have lawlessness in America. Nobody in America is going to be safe in Biden's America. And that if you re-elect the president, you're doing the right thing in terms of preserving our economy, jobs against China. So we have a couple of villains and a couple of heroes that come out of the convention.
You just talked about, they were trying to kind of humanize him, and he talked a lot about law and order. Portland was brought up in his speech. Who was this convention aimed at? Are they trying to get kind of fringe Democrats who might be, pro Black Lives Matter movement, but way against these violent protests, all the stuff that we've seen in Portland, who may be kind of, on the fence of like, I don't know, if they see it as, going too left wing? Who is he kind of aiming this at? Because the suburbs they're way different than they were, way back in the day. So I'm just wondering, what is his target audience now, if he already has his, true base of people?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, you framed the way the discussion will be going here for the next 60 some odd days on these questions you're talking about who gets to define the reality and who's at stake or who's at risk. It's very jarring to see Portland as the poster child of what's wrong in America. So it's understandable. So let's piece this apart. First of all, the president was trying to bring Republicans home. He's trying to say, I'm really the guy you voted for 4 years ago, and I've done everything I told you I was going to do, so I earned your vote. So he's trying to shore up his base of vote, which obviously lost the popular vote to Clinton, but won enough votes to win the Electoral College and become the president. So he's trying to reassemble that base vote. Then he's trying to peel away different kinds of voters who may be subjected to the kind of appeals and fears that he's creating. So he's trying to peel away Black males. Obviously, a lot of Black males speaking at his convention to both try and welcome Black males to his electorate and also make it okay for moderate white voters in the suburbs to say, okay, the guy's not as bad as what the Democrats are saying about what I may have thought. He obviously was going after white suburban women and the whole question of that the fear that the urban chaos was going to come to the suburbs and was going to, he spoke directly to those during the week and then during the convention. And so he thinks that if it's jump ball for that kind of electorate, that he can go after and bring them forward. And then I think he's just trying to peel away little slices of voters in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania on the economic issue. And that's why he raises China as the villain here. He'll stand as the savior for American workers against jobs going overseas to China. So he's trying to reassemble his base and also peel off certain segments of the base that are up for grabs.
Hey, Len, Rod Hill here. Good morning, sir. In conservative circles, people have been talking, I think I'm correct on this, for a while that all of these, I'm going to use the word riots, vandalism acts in American cities over the past weeks/months are actually playing into the Republicans' hands, and Mr. Trump seemed to verify that. So with that said, I found it very interesting that we reported this morning on KGW that last night, in fact, I think I'm right, was the first night there wasn't violence, that there wasn't a riot. So is there a connection there that Democrats are going to start distancing themselves in the coming weeks from the unruly violence acts in American cities, do you think?
Well, you're discussing now, Rod, one of the most interesting and complex kinds of issues. I don't think there's a causal connection. I mean, there may be some people who would normally have gone to a protest would have stayed away to try and bring the temperature down. But clearly this question of what is law and order and public safety in America now is going to be right on the ballot. And you either think of lawlessness. I mean, nobody likes lawlessness. Nobody likes violence. Nobody likes the destruction of property, especially public property. In this case, it's just not what we're all about. I think either as a community or as a country. So if you can frame the debate as that's what lawlessness is, then you win over people who are concerned about that. If in fact you say, wait a minute, lawlessness is a police brutality, lawlessness is systematic racism or a systematic injustice in terms of social or racial issues, then you have a different framing of that issue, and law and order becomes a very different thing. So I think you're going to hear both sides, decrying the violence and trying to stop that. And you're also going to get there's a battle over what does law and order mean nowadays.
I was trying to think back, Len, to 4 years ago. After the Democratic National Convention, after the Republican National Convention back in 2016, I feel like the general consensus was Trump has his supporters, but it's going to be an uphill battle for him to take over and defeat Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, we woke up the day after the election, and he, in fact, did win the election. So do you feel like it is similar now? Does it feel different to you? Because I still feel like the general consensus is Trump has his supporters, but not enough this time around to defeat Joe Biden.
Well, that's right. That's the big question in the election. And a lot of people are trying to decide that right now as to whether the polls would show an increasingly and large lead for Joe Biden can be relied on, and whether that in fact is the trend or whether in fact it's a snapshot in time and that everything's up for grabs, that everything is going to be volatile over this next couple of months. I think we can expect that the numbers will close down considerably. That's a presidential race. This is not going to be a blowout on either side, I don't think. And then the focus, as you said, will shift to those key electoral states. As you know, and your viewers probably know, this is not a national presidential election in that sense. The guy who gets the most votes doesn't win, but it's the person who wins the most electoral votes. And so things will shift to some of those states where I think the battleground states that we all can list off our own group of 6 to 10, where the real battle will go on for voters, and that will rocket back and forth throughout the election. I think right down to the end.
Do you think politics once it gets into election cycle is just a lot of mean-spiritedness as well. And, we've seen these attacks on Joe Biden's cognitive abilities, the memes and edited together things of him, doing kind of word salad stuff. How is that going to continue to play out? Does that, resonate well with Trump's base? Does it piss people off enough on the Democratic side to really kind of, strengthen them even? How do you kind of see that? Because, we just always see such nasty, no matter what election it is, things being said between each candidate.
Well, if you haven't liked the nastiness of the past, you should kind of go to sleep for the next couple of months, because this is going to be the nastiest election we've ever been through. We already have seen all scattered. There'll be personal attacks, obviously, on both those folks. At some point, those will have to be moderated, because the public doesn't like to see that as the sole diet of what you're being elected. But clearly, President Trump and his folks think that they can make a lot of, kind of win a lot of voters by saying that Joe Biden is really kind of, again, this empty vessel. He's a Trojan horse. He leads us into an unpalatable future. And clearly the Democrats know that people in their coalition are united, not a lot of ideas so much as the contempt and urge to get Trump out of the White House. And so I think we will see personal attacks. But I also think, as we've been discussing here for a couple of minutes, that this will be a battle over definitions. What's safety in America? What's happened with the COVID? Who's responsible? Is this Trump's America, and therefore what's going on now you blame the sitting president? Or is this an America that a vision of a fearful future that only Trump can save us from? So I think we're going to have a battle on a number of different narratives as opposed to just a personal clash.
Okay.
Hey, Len, I watched a fair amount of both conventions, both last week and this week. And one thing that surprised me last night was that the president did not bring up Mr. Biden's running mate, Kamala Harris, at least not that many times. But I'm wondering if you feel that there's the possibility that Mrs. Harris will play a larger role in this election than VP candidates have in past elections.
Good thought. It's a good insight, Rod. I mean, clearly the Democrats think she's a star, and they run her out yesterday as the rebuttal to the president. So, in fact, people think that Kamala Harris, is a star and an asset, much more so perhaps on their ticket than Pence is on although Pence does do some things for the president. It helps him with evangelicals and others in the kind of core of his of their base. So I think we will see her be significant. Not just people will be interested in the vice presidential debate. She'll be used in a lot of ways that are beyond perhaps the way a vice president normally is used, because she is the face of the transition, if you will, that Biden has said he's a transitional figure. But people, when it comes right down to it, as you know, Rod, the people vote for the president. They don't vote for the number 2 on the ticket. They vote for the president. And so ultimately this will be a contest about which president appeals to the voters. But there will be some special moments during the campaign when Kamala Harris will play a very significant role in the Democratic challenge.
We saw headlines this morning that read things like the sprint to the White House is on and the race to the White House is officially underway. I was wondering how many days there are until Election Day, and Ron Cross, one of our viewers on Facebook this morning, he did the math for us. 66 and a half days, he says, of comic farce starts now, nonstop. Ron Cross, thanks for watching this morning on Facebook Live. But there it is, 66 and a half days, Len, between now and Election Day. I'm just curious because, again, 2 weeks of conventions, right? The Democrats last week, the Republicans this week. We knew how they were going to try to paint one another. As you mentioned this week, the Republicans trying to paint Trump as a human being and trying to paint Joe Biden, as you described it, as a Trojan horse, so to speak. And then last week, the Democrats trying to paint Donald Trump as the worst case scenario for America. So who, in your opinion, and we do respect your opinion, Len, who, in your opinion, was more successful in getting that across?
Well, let me answer your question, but let me go back to the dates of the election. I think your viewer is 100% correct about when Election Day is. It's November 3rd. But because there are so many states where voting by election, by mail-in ballot is allowed, or applying for an absentee ballot, in fact, it starts a lot sooner than that. So that, in fact, I think both campaigns know that they're starting to appeal in the next couple of weeks to people who will, in fact, ask for and receive an absentee type ballot and start voting. So, in fact, the race is really underway now in a very significant way. And people think of this as being a voting season rather than just a voting election day. But your viewer is right about the numbers of days that'll go on. So what can we expect in terms of that? And just a kind of a reframe your question again for me, if you would.
I'm just curious if you
and
thought,
then let me answer again.
Was one party more successful in the last 2 weeks in trying to get their message across? Because they both are trying to paint each other as the worst case scenario. So who was better at painting that message?
Good. Well, I don't think we know. I think clearly coming out of there are two different conventions, two different theories of the case. Clearly, if you agree with the president and the theory that we're out of the worst of the woods, we're out of the COVID problem, and we can appear with 2,000 of unknown people sitting in a place and not wear masks because we're safe now, that you have a different view of America than what the Democrats were trying to say, which says this president has bungled this job, put us all at risk, and we still are at risk. We haven't solved this health problem, and therefore we've got to solve that before we go on to some of these other things. So really, it's a question of the voters as to which kind of reality they really are experiencing and which ones they believe before they get to the question of who did the better job of convincing them that they ought to vote Democratic or Republican.
Mike Daniels on YouTube wants to know your take, Len, about the optics of the socialist label that Trump is putting on the Democratic Party, and particularly, probably Kamala Harris, who's might be more left-wing than, a more moderate Joe Biden. But what do you make of, him using the socialist label?
Good question, and it's an evolution, obviously. The Republicans have tried really hard to pin about 3 or 4 different raps on Biden. They tried to say he was sleepy. They tried to say he was corrupt when they were going through the whole Ukrainian issue. That didn't seem to stick very well. They tried to say that he was sleepy and not mentally acute, and that didn't seem to stick. So they really have tried to say, well, okay, it's not really Joe, but that he's kind of he's just an empty vessel for this real threat to America, and so that's what they got now. I think they're going to play that out in certain markets, but I think the big thing, with a big tell, we saw a tell here. This is going to be a law and order message from the Republicans and an anti-China message, and they're aimed at 2 different audiences that they think ultimately are at play, and that they've got to win in order to win the election. So China for the jobs issue, and obviously law and order for those suburban voters that they think are in play. And I think that's the battleground around which the election, at least the narratives, will be fought out.
We always like to share the viewers' comments during Sunrise Extra because they're popping up live as we speak here, Len. So I'll try to do that real quickly. As you can imagine, we're hearing from both sides of the political fence, so to speak. For example, viewer Brian watching this morning. Hello there, Brian. Brian says Trump stands with law enforcement. Therefore, for him, it's Trump Biden in 2020. Scrolling down here a little bit further, Michael Donovan says, I stand with first responders, therefore I'll stand with the president. But then he goes on to say that you, Len, are showing your bias this morning, saying that they're trying to paint Trump as a human being. I don't feel like that was showing any kind of bias there. Do you want to defend that statement? Because I feel like you were just simply explaining how they were painting Trump this week and then how they were trying to paint Joe Biden last week.
All right, it's a fair comment. I think there's no question but that they went in trying to say, okay, where are there flaws in the public's perception of the president? And that's why they trotted out the First Lady, all of the family members. That's why they trotted out Melania and Ivanka. people who were telling voters, gee, you just don't know the guy I know. That's why they had Herschel Walker, a black professional ball player, and another couple of people say, here's the guy I know, and here's not the guy you see.
And, yeah,
I don't think they would have gone to that effort.
Hurtful way to describe him. Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah, that was a powerful statement by Herschel Walker.
Thought they had, yeah, they thought they had that locked up, that this was a guy that people really kind of liked and admired and thought was okay, wasn't divisive, didn't tweet. I mean, they tried to make light of all of the tweets and stuff. They really I think they tried to humanize him. Fair comment by your viewer to say that I may be kind of like exposing a bias, but I know that I felt that I thought of Trump in those terms because I've watched for 4 years, and it's been no secret as to what he's been saying to the American public. So I think they felt like they had to kind of move that needle a little bit, and that's why they chose to use the prime time speakers the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell Rod wants to chime in.
Go ahead, Rod. Yeah.
Well, Len, I'm wondering, give me the key demographic, if you will, for both candidates, the demographic that they really need to turn out to vote to be successful.
Well, good question. It'll change during the session, during the election, as things solidify one way or the other. Clearly, the Democrats have got to bring their base out. They've got to bring out the Obama base of 8 and 12. People who felt like it was important to kind of point forward with the message that Obama and Biden had about hope and change, and so they'll have to bring all those people, and they have to get a younger demographic and people who seem to have risen to the occasion on a number of issues, whether they're the economy, racial justice, the environment. Those will be motivating issues for key demographics. They've got to turn those people out, and they've got to turn them out in key states. You know this, Rod. They're battleground states, and we'll be hearing it on KGW, and we'll be hearing it on national news all the time about those handful of states. Is Arizona in play or not? Is Michigan in play or not? Is Pennsylvania? So there'll be key places where that'll be it. The Republicans, obviously, as we've talked about earlier in the discussion, they have to solidify their base. They have to bring home Republicans who may or may not be disaffected. They have to mobilize that significant vote that they were able, and that they lost during 2018. So they have to bring back Republican voters. Then they have to peel away certain groups. Suburban women will be talked about a lot during this election because of the questions about law and order and whether or not as Nina, as you said, whether or not the profile of the suburbs are still the same or not. So suburban voters will be important, and also some other folks who are normally in a Democratic constituency, black males, white workers, who Trump seems to appeal to a little bit more so than the demographic would seem to apply. If they can kind of reach into those folks and peel out percentages of the vote, particularly in key states, then I think they feel they've got a winning formula.
Len, we're up against a Today Show cut-in here, so we do have to say goodbye this morning. In all fairness, I read 2 Trump supporters' comments earlier. I just want to share one from the other side of the fence. Sandy saying, the Dems didn't lie about anything regarding Donald Trump, but the Republicans did nothing but lie, Sandy says. Then she goes on to say, 45 is the worst we've ever had, so you people tell the truth and stop stammering around. I guess she's talking about us. Sandy, all we do is tell the truth here on Sunrise Extra. And we're done with the truth for this Friday. Back with more Sunrise Extra on Monday. Have a great weekend.